Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the very first YouTube video for the Top Cut Academy. I am the self-proclaimed Professor Benji, or Benji Hutchings if you know me as that, and I am over the moon to be here to bring you this video. I have already started our journey over on Metafy to start bringing people into the game and teaching them everything from a beginner's level all the way up to an advanced level, and this is going to be part of that, making YouTube content for you guys to learn a little bit more about the meta, the decks you're playing, how to prepare for a tournament, and of course I'll even throw in some vlogs in there from my own tournament experiences. I'd like to think I've got the personality and the panache to bring you everything in a digestible and entertaining way, and that is what we're going to aim to do every single time we make some content on this channel. And today's video, we're going to start with the top 10 decks that I think are worth playing for Belo, Milwaukee and Lille regionals. This is the new Mega Evolution base set format. I am very excited coming into this format. For those of you that don't know, I had a long time out of the game over the last couple of years, sort of pursuing my career, and I've gotten married and bought a house and all the rest, all the things that come with adult life. But I am competing again for the first time in a long time, just because I want to relay my passion. I want to qualify for Worlds myself, but also show other people how they can get into the game, teach them, and of course take that away with me and start applying it to the Top Cut Academy. I want to sort of open a school and a place for people to learn both in person and online, and have the same experiences and meet the same sort of friends and everything that I've met through this amazing hobby. So here we have it. This is sort of where we're going to start the first video. I would really appreciate it if you could like, subscribe, comment, all the cliche stuff that every other YouTuber says, but it really does help me out, and of course it helps other people find us and start learning the same way that you are here. And of course, link below, the Metafy. I'm not saying that anyone needs to pay for extra coaching or anything like that, but if it's something you're interested in, I give away free consultations for both beginners and intermediate levels. And if you prefer a group environment as well, I do group coaching, which will be a lot of fun, a lot more like a classroom environment. But I think the final thing I'd like to mention is that if you could show this to anyone you know getting into the game, show the Metafy to anyone you know getting into the game, it is truly my passion to start getting people into this hobby and growing it at the rate that I'm so happy to see it growing at the minute with how big tournaments are getting. But I could ramble on for ages about my objectives, but for now let's get into it. The top 10 decks, a tier list for Belo, Milwaukee, which are 1 week, and then Lille the following week after, which I will be attending as a European resident myself. So before we actually get into the decks, I'd just like to talk a little bit about the ranking system, as I don't have all day and nor do you. I will show the decks that I think break into the top 10 of the meta, and I'll talk about why I think that is. If the deck has multiple avenues or archetypes in the way that it can be played, I'll explain why I've selected a certain version as the version I think is best, but I will also mention some of the reasons why I think the others have redeemable qualities, but why they haven't quite made the cut to make their version the one that shines on this tier list. Now remember, all of this is opinion based, sort of backed up by fact and some of the figures that are available to us from online resources such as Limitless, Pokidata and Trainer Hill. So, you know, I am going to back up everything I have with actual facts. But of course this is opinion based. The actual rankings don't mean a lot. It's just sort of where I would place things going into this tournament and what you need to be careful for. And of course, finally, this is a learning experience for me as well. I want to make sure that I'm putting my time and my resources into the right places going into each regional, as I'm trying to qualify for Worlds as well as you. So we're going to revisit each one of these tier lists after a tournament has been done and sort of look where we're going to sort of come up with a point system. Hopefully you can help me with that if you have any suggestions, and we're going to come up with a way to sort of review and see how accurate we were on how well some of these decks are going to perform throughout the meta. So that'll be really good fun as well, and another bit of content, and hopefully you can all take the mick out of me when I get things a million miles wrong. But without further ado, let's get into our 10th place deck. And here it is. First up, Mega Kangaskhan EX and Terrapagos EX. Now, some of you may remember when Terrabox did quite well in Japan off the back of Tord and a number of other players, I think Rahul, Fabian, stuff like that. We had a sort of a little mini meta where defense Terrapagos, tank Pagos as people like to call it, became quite strong, and then it sort of got to a regional and never really came out and did anything as the meta sort of shifted away from both of them. However, this deck is almost like an upgraded, a buffed up version of that. Tank Pagos, way back when Stellar Crown first came out, obviously Terrapagos with Briar and Dust Noir really hit a lot of heights and was a very, very strong deck for a while. And I think this is more of an iteration of that and showing a lot of the same strengths. It obviously still continues to use the Curly Wall ability on Bouffalant that reduces the damage that colourless Pokemon, basic colourless Pokemon, take from attacks. Obviously, that means that Mega Kangaskhan, starting at 300 HP, goes straight up to 360, which is an absolute behemoth to get through. For a lot of decks, there are a small handful of decks that are able to sort of reach that upper echelon of damage. Then add something like a Bravery Charm to that, and we're getting over 400 HP. Now, that is something that almost no deck can deal with. I know that things like Raging Bolt and Goldengo may just be able to get there, but they have to use every single resource that they have in their hand, and to be able to do that a number of times throughout a game is going to be very, very, very difficult for them to do. So the Mega Kangaskhan coming in and being even tankier, but there are a number of other reasons why Mega Kangaskhan is good for this deck. As we know, Dual Seeker on Knockdown can be absolutely phenomenal. If you've got a Terror in play, drop it and tutor out any two cards you like from your deck. An absolutely astoundingly powerful card. However, the most important thing to note with that is that without some inherent draw power in your deck, sometimes Dual Seeker becomes a little bit lackluster. You know, if you need to Ultra Ball and you've only got two cards left in hand, you know, that means your hand is going to be empty on the other side of that Ultra Ball. If you need to Earthen Vessel, you might get the energy that you want, but you might have to discard something really important from your hand, you know? So what Mega Kangaskhan does is it has that run errand ability. It says that once it's when it's in the active, once during your turn, you can use Run Errand to draw 2 additional cards, which means with your draw for turn and those 2 cards, you are drawing 3 more cards during that turn, which is very, very efficient and some draw power that this deck, similar to Terrabox, is really, really, really going to enjoy. Now, on top of the Run Errand, Mega Kangaskhan doesn't come with a bad attack. It has got a base 200 damage, and you flip a coin until you get tails, doing 50 more damage for each. Now, luckily, due to our survivability and our defense, we don't have to get those coin flips in our heads to take one-hit knockouts. Obviously, relying on a coin flip is not something that I would ever tell you to take to a regional. It could be very risky and your day could be lost on just a little bit of poor luck. However, Mega Kangaskhan can sort of do that extra bit of little bit of extra damage and get through some of these stage 2s and a bit of a high roll, which puts us in a far better situation. So realistically, we've got some text underneath our attack that says you can do more and high roll and get even further ahead, or you can do 200 damage and be exactly where you're supposed to be anyway. We are more than happy to take 2-hit knockouts, as we're usually going to be trading favourably due to the survivability we have with Mega Kangaskhan. Now moving over to Terrapagos, we're not going to be able to use Crown Opal on this one. It is just going to be the first attack that does 30 damage for each of our bench Pokemon, which can go all the way up to 240 damage with a full bench and Area 0 in play, as we know. So this is a very respectable attacker in its own right. Just 2 colourless energy, very easy to set up with a Crispin, 2 attachments over 2 turns, whatever way you might find yourself doing it, a Glass Trumpet. You know, there's 1,000,001 ways to do it in these lists, and one of those I'll be showing you next up. But yeah, Terrapagos, a really good attacker again. And then finally, to close out our games, a lot of the time we're going to be using that Blood Moon Ursaluna. 260 HP on it already. It was already a humongous colourless basic Pokemon. Now add the 60 reduction in damage. Opponents need to be doing 320 just to get through it for 2 prizes. Stick a bravery charm on that, and we are over 350 HP. Again, making it very, very difficult in the late game when we're going to be using this to get through. So hopefully we're able to use that Blood Moon attack and take a number of prizes, as we do have switching cards to stream that attack back and forth turn after turn. I think finally the last thing to mention is this deck, if you're sort of worried about not knowing exactly what to play in the meta, whether you've not played Gardevoir before, whether you've not played Dragapult before, and you're a bit worried about taking something and playing the mirror, I would always recommend playing something new. You can put your time into it, you can get really good with that deck, and other people might not be as competent with it. And so this is something that I would say for newer players is going to be, the skill ceiling is quite high. Obviously with all Noctowl decks you need to take care of your resources, but the defense of this deck and the survivability gives you a little bit of time to make decisions, and you're not going to be pushed out of the game straight away a lot of the time. So next up, let's look at a deck list. First of all, I would like to give a humongous shout out to Omnipoke, both Joe and Jack there. I've been talking to Joe over the last couple of weeks about starting this academy, and he has obviously been very, very supportive, but we've also been exchanging ideas of what we're going to be playing for the Mega Evolution format, and Joe mentioned this deck, and it's not really something that I looked to in great detail. I sort of thought that it was an idea and never really looked at it again, as I thought Tank Pagos might not be the right thing for this format. However, after playing with it online quite a lot and testing in person, I think this deck is definitely a top 10 deck, and this is Joe's list. I've changed some cards here and there just to try some different things, but I definitely think this is the baseline and a really, really strong 60 for you to be using. And trust me, Joe knows what he's talking about, but this deck really does have everything. We've already talked about the Terrapagos, the Mega Kangaskhan, the Blood Moon Ursaluna, obviously that Latias, really, really important to be able to pivot out our basics. But I think one of the big key cards in this deck as well is the Cornerstone Ogerpon. We've already mentioned that Goldengo could be a problem for our deck if we aren't able to set up our defensive mode quick enough, whereas Cornerstone can be thrown in the active and Goldengo isn't able to hit it. So that gives us plenty of time to either be able to set up for late game if they do have answers to the Cornerstone, but sometimes our opponent playing Goldengo won't have any answers whatsoever to get through our Cornerstone, meaning we can just attach a fighting, crisping on any other colours of energy and start doing demolish 140 at a time and slowly grind that game to a halt. So very cool include. And I think the final thing to mention is obviously the Lille Clefairy. Raging Bolt, as we mentioned, is another thing we might have a little bit of a hard time beating. So being able to have a consistent knockout on that for just a Clefairy and a Crispin every turn is really, really good. We're able to pick both of those out with a Knockdown, whether that be a Night Stretcher out of the discard, a Nestball from deck, whatever it might be, and a Crispin. We are going to be able to stream those Lille's Clefairies back and forth, and then hopefully later on in the game just use something like a Blood Moon to get through the last 2 prizes. So we do have a chance against both of the aggressive decks, and then I think that as mentioned on the other slide, this deck really does take advantage of those decks that can't take one-hit knockouts, being able to survive using things like Professor's Turo, or hopefully if our opponent ends up bumping our Area Zero, discarding anything that has damage on it. Even though the energy might go with it, I do think this is going to be a worthwhile trade-off a lot of the time. So there you have it, Mega Kangaskhan and Terrapagos EX. Now let's get into number 9. And here it is, Raging Bolt. Now, I know I've got to mention first off that this deck might be a little bit lower on my tier list than it is on other people's. I know that Raging Bolt is a very popular deck that has very good day 2 conversions, but for me, the reason I'm putting it at number 9 is this deck, in my opinion, doesn't really gain much from the new set. I know that you can obviously play the Lunatone and the Solrock version with that Lunar Cycle to try and get those energy in the bin, the extra draw power. But I think time and time again, we've sort of been shown that the knocked out version proves to float to the top. It proves to be a lot stronger, being able to use Dual Seeker to tutor out those extra cards you need, and then using the Teal Mass to supplement that draw as well. We just previously mentioned a couple of seconds ago about how the Mega Kangaskhan's Errand Run is able to supplement those extra cards a turn alongside being able to draw things with Knocked Out, just to make sure you don't fizzle out. But it's a very, very similar thing here. Knocked Out, very, very powerful, as Teal Masked Ogerpon is able to supplement it. But I think that with lots of other decks gaining a lot of cards from this set, Lille's Determination, some of these fighting packages, and making themselves push on, making themselves a greater threat, Raging Bolt doesn't gain anything apart from maybe these larger HP 3-prize Pokemon that it is able to reach. The change in the meta, the change in the look of some of the Pokemon in the meta is what Raging Bolt likes, but I wouldn't say that it gets any more powerful. It sort of remains at the level it's at right now, and just sort of wants to push into some of these matchups where it can take those extra prizes. That being said though, I do think that Baby Bolt is still a very good 1-prize attacker that's able to sort of pick off your opponent's evolving basics and get Raging Bolt into the game, similar to sort of keeping a 1-prize board in a lot of other matchups. This can work very well, just a Teal Mask getting those energy into play, and that Baby Bolt up front sort of sniping damage onto the bench. But on the flip side of that, I do think that we're going to see a lot more bench sitting supportive Pokemon such as Psyduck, such as Shaman, which is a big problem for this deck. That means that the Baby Bolt is no longer something that can be relevantly used to take prizes on the bench. You're going to have to obviously use another attacker to get through your opponent's active, or of course boss up something and use the Baby Bolt then, which obviously makes the deck a little bit more awkward. So I don't think that it likes to see things like Shaman, which I do really predict to be a lot more played due to sort of the current successes of things like Terra Box in this format we just had, and continuing those successes further on into this. This deck obviously still really struggles against Gardevoir as well, which is something you really don't want. I'm predicting, you know, spoiler alert, the Gardevoir is going to be close to the top of this meta. I'm not going to say exactly where, but maybe you can guess. So I think that having a bad matchup into that, and of course lots of decks play Lille's Clefairy now. We were just talking about how Mega Kangaskhan is throwing in that Lille's Clefairy for a little bit more damage output there into these Dragon Pokemon for the psychic weakness. Same with Dragapult will fall victim to that. Terra Box will be playing the Lille's Clefairy. Hoa Armory will be playing Lille's Clefairy. So there are some sort of hurdles that Raging Bolt can trip over outside of the matchups that it's usually weak to in the Gardevoir as well. And finally, it can just struggle with a little bit of inconsistency. I think that relying so heavily on a supporter every turn, such as Sada, to get your energy onto your Raging Bolt can cause some hiccups throughout the game as the deck sort of finds itself maybe early game, you know, like the bottom of a pyramid, you can sort of have a very wide amount of choices on where you can go with the deck and how you play the matchup. But as the game goes on, we sort of narrow in on one game plan, and that is taking big knockouts with the Raging Bolt EX and that Roaring Thunder attack. So anyway, let's look at a deck list, and I just want to give a shout out to Shiny Hydroppy. Very good performance recently in a Limitless tournament, and I just wanted to showcase one of those knocked out builds that I was talking about. And as you can see, not a single new card, except for the new Full Art Night Stretcher, of course. So we will say that it does include some cards from our Mega Evolution set. But when we're talking about new additions and new cards that it didn't previously play, as you can see, there are none involved here. I do really like sort of the new addition of Iron Leaves EX in this deck. We know that we're going to be getting sort of a resurgence of Marnie's Grimmsnarl. We know that Zoroark is starting to do very well in recent regionals as well. well, and I think that success will continue. So Iron Lee's a nice little option just to sweep up some of those Teal Mask Ogerpon's grass energies, move into the active and take some very, very efficient knockouts. It also helps Raging Bolt get out some of those sob locks, those corners, which I do think will still be prevalent in our next format, only playing the 1-0 scenario and no way to recover it, so that Iron Lee's being able to come into the active, retreat, and obviously carry on with your game plan from there. So I think we all know how Raging Bolt works, so nothing new here. It's just very, very standard to what we've been seeing, and I think 9th place for me is about as high as I can put this deck for now, because I do think there are some other things that just shine a little bit more on the other side of this release of Mega Evolution. But that being said, I think the next deck is a perfect example of that. So let's see our number 8. And as I said, a deck that shows the other side of that coin, a deck that is improved so much by this new release of Mega Evolution. Ceruledge EX, a deck that was really on the fringe of the format. I would say really low, sort of tier 3, very, very fringe use, not a lot of good matchups, and now all of a sudden with the addition of this set, Ceruledge has bounced right up to the top of the meta, into that top 10, and I think right now the reason I'm giving it a number 8 and not a little bit higher is just simply because it's not proved itself at large events yet. It isn't currently the 3rd most played deck in Limitless online tournaments, with over 50% win rate, getting close to that 55%, which is really, really respectable for Ceruledge. It's picking up good matchups against Goldengo, good matchups against Gardevoir, 50-50s into Dragapult, and I think that is really, really, really impressive from where the deck was just a couple of weeks ago. Now, the reason this deck has come on so much is because of the Lunatone and the Solrock. We've already mentioned Lunatone's Lunar Cycle ability, discarding that fighting energy, and of course drawing 3 cards once during your turn. That gives Ceruledge that extra draw it needs and puts the energy it needs in the deck. It is almost a better Radiant Greninja, which this deck really, really thrived off. Lunatone really helping this deck out in that sense. But more importantly, the Solrock shines like a sun, no pun intended there, with that Cosmic Beam attack. It does 70 damage, does not hit for weakness or resistance, but that is absolutely fine here in this deck, because what we can do is we can use our Squawk ability early, maybe not, and we don't want to if we don't have to, but we can get our Squawk ability down, draw into a bigger hand, use our Carmine's turn 1, getting those energies into the bin, using our Lunatone, drawing extra cards, and getting our Charcadet and our Solrock into play, and then from there we are able to keep our board completely one prize while we chase down some of our opponent's smaller Pokemon, whether they be evolving basics, whether they be support Pokemon, stuff like that. We are able to just start chipping away at those with Solrock, taking early prizes, and then eventually when our opponent puts in some of those bigger threats, like their 2 prize Pokemon, maybe even their 3 prize Pokemon, our Ceruledge can come in and start mopping up with that Abyssal Flames attack. And as you know, that Lunatone going to be adding those energy to the discard. Ceruledge, every time one goes down, more energy goes in again. And of course, we're still going to be playing very high counts of discarding cards, Vessels, Carmines, Ultra Balls that are going to be putting those energy in the bin as well. So Ceruledge being able to sort of boast being able to deal with these one prize decks with something like Solrock, maybe not these big one prize decks like our Typhlosion and stuff like that, because eventually they'll move out of the way and our Solrock will no longer be effective into those, but definitely those Dragapults, those Goldengos early game, and of course our Gardevoirs, Ceruledge really taking advantage of those. And of course, the coolest thing with Ceruledge that I am a humongous fan of is all energy counts towards your Abyssal Flames. So you can play things like Jet Energy, Mist Energy as well. Jet Energy to move in and out if you are ever put into Soblock or the new corner from the Yveltal. Ceruledge able to get around that very easily, and of course once those energies are discarded at a later time, they count towards your Abyssal Flames. And then if you felt that maybe the poison package picking up Camerupt DX, for example, with those burns, Poison Donk, any of those things, Cerulean could play that mist energy to stop it from being effective from those as well. And again, that energy in those matchups where it's not needed can just be discarded and add damage. So I do think Cerulean EX, if you want to hang your hat somewhere to say the most improved deck, then this is definitely it. And one for those beginner players that can really help you learn the game, learn some sequencing, learn when it's right or wrong to sort of put your 2 prizes in play, and when it's right and wrong to put down a squawk ability, so on and so forth. I think this is going to be a really strong place to start. But let's have a look at a list. I would just like to give some credit to Wizzed or Wizd, either way, someone who's done very well on Limitless with this in an online tournament. And let's just look at that list. It is really cool. Some of the standouts for me are obviously the Legacy Energy, making that Cerulean just a 1 prize Pokemon in some of those matchups where you need to skew the prize trade a little bit more. That can also put you in a position to force a Briar, obviously using that Soul Rock early game to take a couple of prizes. When your opponent takes those out, they might take another Cerulean, and then all of a sudden they're down to 2 prizes. You can stick that Legacy Energy on, use that Briar, maybe take 3 prizes, and then you are left in the active, only costing 1 prize for your opponent, which is a really nice position to be in. Of course, that Legacy Energy can easily be cheekily used on a Soul Rock early game to start hitting into those small Pokemon and being worth 0 prizes, and in a pinch, if you really need to, if you're not able to get that Squawk ability, that Fez off of the board, you can throw that Legacy Energy on them as well and only be worth 1 prize. I think the Briar becomes really important, and we're able to force that a little bit more now, because previously Cerulean will come into the active 2 prizes, Cerulean 2 prizes, and you always got to hope that you've been keeping up with your opponent, that you've also gone down to 2 prizes, 3 prizes to be able to use the Briar and take a knockout. But now, if we don't feel like we're in the position to use Briar, we can just sit back again, make our board a 1 prize board again, use that Soul Rock and get us in a position to our opponent effectively goes down to 2 prizes, and we are able to finish the game from that Briar. And as I said, the Jet Energy's there, the Fighting Gongs, but I think the standout card in this list for me is the Iron Bundle. Now you're probably thinking, why is Iron Bundle the standout card out of all of these new things? Well, early on in the game, as you can see, we don't play many boss, we only play 2. Obviously we're going to be focusing on getting our board set up, the energies into the discard, with Carmine, things like that, Ultra Ball. And so using boss early in the game doesn't feel all that great, whereas our Soul Rock will still want to be eating away at our opponent's board, and our Iron Bundle can help us do that. If at any point they put a Fez in the active, something with more than 70 HP in the active to where we're not going to be able to take an effective prize, we can just pop that Iron Bundle, move it out of the way, and make sure Cosmic Beam is taking a prize every single time it's used, or at least putting damage in relevant places where Cerulean can mop up later on. That 3 Night Stretcher right there is going to really help us get those Iron Bundles back out and use them early game to make sure that rock package is extra effective. This is a deck that I'm a huge fan of so far. As I said, just in the 8th place, I think it does have the potential to move further up, but I think we've got to see how it performs at some of those bigger events rather than just online. But let's get into our number 7 deck. And would you look at that, it is yet another Knockdown deck, none other than Terrorbox. I think that Terrorbox's success has sort of been on a bit of a roller coaster. I think, as I mentioned, when Tord and that small entourage that went out to Japan did very well, I think that Terrorbox's popularity picked up a great deal, but it never really lived up to that hype that it originally had. It sort of very quickly found itself have some tough matchups. I think obviously them taking it to Japan, no one really expected the archetype, therefore did really well, but I think once it started making its way to some of those Western regionals, people had sort of already figured out a way to combat Terrorbox, but now it has come back round. It had some really good showings at Worlds, some really good showings at Frankfurt, at Pittsburgh as well, and I do think that Terrorbox's success is here to stay. It's got some very strong 50-50 matchups to a lot of the best decks. You know, your Wellspring, Ogerpon, your Iron Hands, your Pikachu, your Clefairy, being able to make use of lots of different attackers in different matchups can skew those numbers a little bit for you, as long as you're doing the right things at the right time. I do think, however, it will suffer just a little bit from the rise in Shaman. I think that obviously Wellspring, Ogerpon, being able to take those early prizes can devastate boards more than just taking 2 prizes. You might be able to take 2 Dreepy, that's all your opponent can get at, 2 Rolts, 2 Gimmighoul, but obviously if people start to play Shaman, those devastating effects will not be able to happen anymore. You'll actually need to get rid of the Shaman first, and so it means that the explosiveness into a game and the devastation of Terrorbox does fall a little bit, but I do think it's got the tools and the damage output just to be able to get over the line still. It gains lots of new attackers, not necessarily all going in the deck, but I think that there's potential for lots of these different things to be tried. Mega Kangaskhan, as we already discussed, this deck very similar to the Terrapagos deck, but probably being more on the offense side of things rather than the defense. So Mega Kangaskhan, a good addition in here as well with that run errand. Mega Latias, Mega Mawile is actually one that I've been experimenting with and looking at as well. I think that putting in a small metal package for the Mega Mawile is a really cool option as well, just to get that big damage output at the end of the game to try and close things out. Because Terrorbox sometimes, very similar to some of these other knockdown decks, can struggle to close out games just because you don't have these big heavy attackers, but Mawile taking 80 damage for each prize we've already taken is pretty impressive, so that able to do some big damage later on in the game. It'll win a lot of games from like simple sub blocking, things like that. As we know, Terrorbox, when you find yourself in a bit of a pickle or find yourself running out of options or ideas, you can just stick a Wellspring Ogerpon in the active use sub and hope your opponent's got no way out. And let me tell you, a lot of these decks now are playing Turo, playing Switch, but maybe not enough to deal with a full Terrorbox deck. So you will win plenty of games in that way. I don't recommend going for it all the time, but obviously when the situation arises, you should definitely take advantage of that. And of course, Lily's Determination, it's really big for a lot of the decks we've got on the format. Just that extra 2 cards you're going to be seeing, taking you up to 8 in those early turns, is absolutely crucial. And especially for a deck like Terrorbox, as you probably have noticed from a lot of lists and from the list I'm going to show you, it's sort of a big amalgamation and a mishmash of lots of different ideas. And the problem with doing that, as strong as it is into a lot of matchups, is that you've got very low counts of cards that you really need in a lot of matchups. And sometimes when you're playing things like Research, or even when you've got to play things like Vessel, Ultra Ball, you're going to be discarding really, really key things that may not be essential at the minute, but could definitely become essential further down the line in the game. And unfortunately with Terrorbox is that you don't play an awful lot of recovery because you haven't got the space either. So those cards, it's almost the equivalent of lost zoning them. You know, once you've discarded them, you don't actually have access to those again. So I think something like a Lily's Determination, just to shuffle draw 6 later in the game, because Iona doesn't feel as good further into the game you get, as you are quite aggressive and you take early prizes. So just the 6 alone would be already in this deck, but I think those extra 2 cards at the start of the game when you have 6 prizes, the 8 cards, is so strong for a deck like this, helping you get those combo pieces together. But let's have a look at the list so we can sort of have a look a little bit more. Now, down the bottom here, this is probably the longest list I've ever seen. But this is 1 fire energy as well, so that energy count absolutely wild. But I'll give credit to Tapu Will for this really bonkers deck. But as you can see, that Lily's Determination in there, definitely for some of that draw, that Briar, we were just talking about how important that is to take extra prizes. But something that may catch your eye is the Eevee, the Flareon, and the Leafeon here. Something that was popularized by Szymanski in the last, Alex Szymanski should I say, in the last regional. A really cool idea. I think that this deck was already sort of struggling for space, so it blows my mind they were able to fit this in, but it seems to be sticking around and lots of lists seem to be using this. So the Flareon being able to Burning Charge, get some of those energy onto the board is one of the key things it's for, but obviously that Carnelian, 280 damage, able to get through some really key things. Zoroark is obviously picked up in popularity, being able to get straight through that, and the vitality band up to 290 as well, even if they've got a little bit of defense. 290 also knocks out a God of War if anything like a Gravity Mountain was to be played in this. Not in this list, but obviously if you were to play that Gravity Mountain as well, that would be able to kill a God of War. So, you know, you've got lots of different options in these decks. You've got counter catches, you've got boss for when you do fall behind, or if you want to be the aggressor, you've got boss in here. You know, the one buddy pop in the one Terror Orb, just to make sure you've got plenty of options, able to see things, able to see your Rotons when you need them, able to get out your Terror Pokemon when you need to do that as well. But, sorry about that. The thing with Terror Box is, as you can probably tell from the way I'm talking about it, the inherent strengths of the deck are definitely there, and I think you're able to do a lot of really cool things into a lot of different matchups. But the thing that stresses me out about the deck is that, you know, you only need to prize, for example, this one Teal Mask Ogerpon in a lot of matchups, and all of a sudden you find yourself clogging up a little bit, and you've got to navigate your way round. So I think that the deck feels a lot like a puzzle in a way, to where the players that enjoy sort of trying to figure out how to solve a problem while the game's going on every turn, they will really thrive on this and they'll do well. But I think those players who sort of want a set idea of what they need to do in a matchup and sort of follow specific objectives in order to win that, this probably isn't going to be the deck for you, just because you're often left, especially with just Knocked Owl and not really drawing that many extra cards, or not having a Pidgeot thing, you're often left to put together the combo that is the best you can do to push you towards winning the game. But it's going to be very rare unless you're having an absolutely perfect game with good draws, not having to discard any key resources. You're going to be able to put together the absolute best combination of cards all the time, if you understand what I'm saying. So we do think Terror Box very, very, very good. This list crazy, but most of them do look like this as well. Just crazy counts, but just keep in mind that this skill ceiling very, very high, very strong matchups when it gets going, but definitely, definitely difficult. So we've talked about Terror Box. Let's get into our number 6, the last one before we break into our top half. And that final deck before the top half is none other than N's Zoroark EX. It feels so good to say that this is currently a champion deck. It was finally able to knock God of War off the pedestal of winning yet another premier event. Liam Halliburton, massive congratulations on being able to take that mantle home, more than the first place regional. I think being able to knock God of War off that top spot for the first time in such a long time is such a fantastic achievement, and it was able to do that because of its fantastic God of War and Dragapult matchups. Of course, Zoroark needing to sort of skirt around those matchups it's not really able to deal with. It's something that's been designed to deal with the best decks in the game, and doesn't do so well against those more rogue picks that you're going to see earlier on in your day, or if you're not doing so well at a regional, you're going to start seeing some things you haven't prepared for. But Zoroark, once you get to those top tables, you're definitely going to be seeing God of War, you're definitely going to be seeing Dragapult, and of course those lists that are finding the space to put in the Toe School as well, having a good time into Goldengo as well. So it does have really good matchups into some of the top contenders in the meta, but obviously its downfall is some of those weird and wacky decks that are on the fringes. But one thing I would want to mention is that something like Joltik Box is actually falling in popularity right now. The Joltik Goldengo, I think, is maybe fallen by the wayside a little bit and not as good as some of the other Goldengo archetypes. So it's really cool to obviously see some of those bad matchups falling away, it's good matchups remaining, and Zoroark being able to thrive off of that. It's gained a couple of new things from the new set. I think Lily's Determination is obviously a really, really big include in this. Being able to see those extra few cards earlier in the game can allow you to get into your combo pieces a little bit more. And you're not so reliant on TM Evo then from the Arven. You're able to obviously draw into a little bit of a better hand. You're not as reliant on Serrano then, just because the Lilies has a much higher chance of actually drawing into something relevant for your next hand, rather than needing to Serrano for those Zoroarks, for that Serendipity, so on and so forth. So I do think Zoroark gains something really significant through Lille, but I think the other thing it gains is it's a small part of parcel of the deck, but the new Evitor with that clutch attack, it does pretty much exactly the same as Maractus. It doesn't have that ability that leaves a residual of 6 damage on your opponent, but it does lock them in the active, and of course have free retreat, so it does seem to have a little bit more synergy with this deck, maybe not needing to play as many air balloon if you were playing more than one, for example. You're able to just move this Evitor in and out of the active and use it at will. And then I think the final thing to mention is with that free retreat, not as reliant on End's Castle. You can sort of move that Evitor into the active and pivot out that way once your turn has developed as well. And I think one of the I'm just giggling because the endless opportunities, the endless things I've seen Zoroark paired with over the last couple of weeks. I've seen it with Crystal, I've seen it with Cornerstone, Ogerpon, I've seen it with Blaziken, I've seen it with Dragapult, but I think most interestingly I've seen Zoroark paired with Mega Lucario, and I think that this is sort of a homage back to the Lucario GX. That was played to get through your fellow Zoroark players way back in Sword and Shield era, yes, Sun and Moon era, sorry, and sort of Sword and Shield, either way, but the Lucario obviously being played back then, and this pretty similar, to be honest with you, just a really efficient 1 energy attacker to be used alongside the draw power of Zoroark, and then sort of counteracting Lucario's absolutely horrendous psychic weakness by being able to use that Zoroark and its little ends package with that Reshiram there, so still being able to have a good time into that. So we'll see how that develops. I don't know if that's maybe the best way to play the deck. I think right now the list that I'm looking at and have been playing still sort of focus on that more classic feel of Zoroark, but I do think over time it's something we might look at ourselves depending on how it performs and stuff, because Zoroark definitely a good partner, and I do think, I'm laughing about it again because I've seen like Zoroark Crystal doing like really well online at the minute. It's won quite a few limitless tournaments, or come very high Zoroark Crystal, so a strange one for me, but definitely doing well. So it's quite funny to see Zoroark starting to be optimized and utilized in all different ways since Liam's big win. But without further ado, let's just look at a lovely list. Now, this list belongs to Hayden Greer, or Greyer, sorry if I've butchered your name. But yeah, as you can see, it's very similar to the sort of style of Liam's deck, adding in those Lily's Determinations, still very thick on that Serrano line, playing to Professor Turo. I really like the second monkey here to sort of push off some of that residual damage. And of course we've got that damp Psyduck as well, sort of giving you an even better time into Dragapult, making sure that they're not able to use Dust Noir to get through a Zoroark in one hit. You're pretty much always going to be doing 200 with that Phantom Dive. See that Phantom Dive come towards you then with the hand. So yeah, Dragapult pretty much always leaving damage on Zoroark if it ever wants to do any damage to you, so that's going to be really good for you. And then, as I mentioned, that Toedscruel sort of little package there to help you out in that Goldengo matchup. I think the only thing that worries me a little bit about this list is just the one Night Stretcher. It does play 2 Super Rod, but I think there'll be points in the game where, you know, against Goldengo you might have the Toedscruel down. Toedscruel might have had to have been traded away earlier in the game, and I think maybe having 2 Night Stretcher, 1 Rod instead, just so you can get that online a little bit easier, just because this deck doesn't play any Ultra Ball, so I feel like getting that Toedscruel could be quite difficult just by trading for it. So maybe putting up this Night Stretcher here would be something I'm interested in. But apart from that, as I said, very similar sort of output to Liam's deck, same good matchups, and I think that Zoroark's reign is going to be around for a little while now. I think that it sort of found its spot in the meta. It definitely has good matchups, and long live, I say. As long as Gardevoir is not continuing to be at the top, I am a happy bunny. But without further ado, let's get into our 5th pick, the halfway point of our video, and it is none other than Marnie's Grimmsnarl EX. So another trainer's Pokemon coming back into the limelight. I think that Marnie's Grimmsnarl has been on a bit of a discovery path, a bit of a soul search in the last couple of months. Coming off the back of NAIC, the popularity seemed to really dissipate. Very, very hype going into that internationals, but I think even after some pretty good performances, it just did not seem like the deck for Worlds. It had an absolutely terrible Goldengo matchup, so it's gonna sort of be very happy to be back in the format. And I'll be honest with you, it mainly comes back into the format because of Lily's determination. There are some other things which I'll talk further down the slide, but Lily's determination, an absolutely phenomenal card for this deck. It plays really weird lines of Pokemon just to be able to fit everything in. Obviously, you've got a stage 2 Pokemon in the Grimmsnarl, you've got your Frostlasses, you've got your Monkey Dories, you've got the Budu for the early game, you've got Maractus previously, now sort of going to evolve into that Evatol that we mentioned previously. It's just a little bit more comfortable and has a free retreat over that Maractus, so definitely an Evatol to go in there as well. But as you can imagine, with all of those Pokemon and all of those evolution lines all going into one deck, similar to sort of what we were talking about the Terra Box, nothing can be fleshed out to the rate at which you'd want it to be. So you're very reliant on sort of those artisans and those Spikemouth gyms to get everything into play, and that could be a little hit and miss for a lot of games, and people started to get a bit frustrated with Marnie's Grimmsnarl because when it was in games and you evolved up and you could get going, the Marnie Grimmsnarl was obviously able to take control of the game, do those de-evolution plays, and run away with it all, essentially. And sometimes win games you really, really shouldn't win just by being able to devolve your opponent's board. But I think that the inconsistencies sort of started to annoy people a little bit. It's good matchups, didn't seem as good as people first perceived, like the Gardevoir matchup. I think some of the better Gardevoir players were finding ways around Marnie's Grimmsnarl. A brilliant example is Isaiah's Bradner's sort of energy acceleration TM, turbo energize should I say, and that helped him get through NAIC to his eventual win, and they were finding other ways around this, so it really fell out of favour. But I think that now it is shot back up and it really, really is thriving. The first thing you have probably read is that it was the most represented deck in top 16 of the Yokohama Champions League, with 4 in top 16. So an absolutely fantastic performance by this deck. The next most represented deck was Charizard Pidgeot at 3 and Gardevoir at 3. So, you know, we're sort of coming to a position where, okay, we're looking at this deck, it wasn't previously good, but now it's got 4 in top 16. Something has definitely changed, and that is the release of Lily's determination. But more than that, it is more ability-based tech such as Shaman and Psyduck make for easier prize maps. Now previously, your opponent could play around, you know, putting down things with abilities for your Frostlass to get through certain Pokemon. They're going to play less abilities, your Frostlass is doing less damage, less spread, less multi-prize turns. Whereas now, because of Grimmsnarl's inherent ability to be able to snipe the bench, people might be tempted to put down things like a Shaman in the matchup, which has got very low HP. So you're actually able to take those extra prize turns very easily. You know, someone could just start a Shaman, start a Psyduck by having them in their deck. For example, if you go up against a Charizard, you might feel unconfident, but then they flip over their starting Pokemon, it's a Psyduck, and you know that there is going to be a turn where you're able to pick off that Psyduck and take a knockout somewhere else for a multi-prize turn. So I think that that really works in Marnie Grimmsnarl's favour, and going forward I think that it is a very strong deck. So let's look at a deck list. It is as standard as you could probably get. The one thing that I obviously said that I do disagree with is I do think this should be an Evatol. But apart from that, everything is bog standard. This Morgrim is really annoyingly over here and not here. But it's got that fork out of Monkey Dory, the secret box, which is so powerful in this deck, especially with the power level of these stadiums, Team Evolution, and that Devolution, as we mentioned, able to just win you those games. You really have no business winning just by being able to devolve your opponent's board. They could be a million miles ahead, but if you're able to get that off quite late in the game, take a couple of prizes that turn, and then they aren't able to build anything back up, and you can just continue to shadow bullet for your heart's content until the game is over. Now, one thing I have noticed about a lot of the lists online is they're sort of cutting down to one or sometimes no rare candy, just sort of going for lilies into TM Evolution and knowing that you're going to get your board set up by the end of turn 2, start of turn 3, every single game, just with this extra consistency. And I don't hate that at all. Rare Candy, a great card, a powerful card, but it can get in the way at times. So Grayson Long, well done for this great deck. Been doing very well online, and I think this is a perfect starting point. Minusing the Maractus for Evisol, please do that. But yeah, great starting point for you to play Marnie's Grimmsnarl. Now, moving from 5, I think the top 4, before we get into them, all of these decks are very strong, have been very strong, and there are some controversial takes, should I say, on where these decks are placed, and that controversy starts with our 4th pick today. And I'm sure you are all really shocked to see Dragapult Dusknoir at my 4th place deck, a deck that has been so dominant for so long, not quite getting over the line in a lot of those regionals, but the vast majority of them being a Gardevoir Dragapult final, filling top 8s in a lot of tournaments, filling top 16s, top 32s, and always a reliable deck to try and get day 2 with. But I just think that Dragapult Dusknoir has a few too many obstacles now. Now, it is the second most played deck online at the minute, behind Goldengo, but you might notice that its win percentage isn't quite as high in the 50% as it previously was. And I think that's due to some of these new challenges it's dealing with. So I think that the first thing we need to talk about is obviously the Gardevoir continues to be strong, continues to be good, and Dragapult Dusknoir cannot beat it. And I think one of the other things is that the deck has sort of started to morph into more of a hybrid, playing some Rare Candy and some Slowpoke, you know, and Jellicent really thrives on that. I think that previously Slowpoke was too slow for Gardevoir, so it would just run over it anyway. But at least against Jellicent, you weren't sort of locked out of the game. You could still get into your Dragapults pretty consistently. However, now, with that sort of Rare Candy build, the inconsistency start creeping in because you're not, you know, Rare Candy's going to be dead cards. You're not always going to have both pieces in your hand. And so it really thrives off that. But then on top of that, Zoroark EX has started to pick up in popularity as well. And you know that that has a really good time into you. And of course, is going to be playing that damp Psyduck for a lot of the time, meaning that Dusknoir isn't going to be able to help you get over the hurdle of knocking out that Zoroark. And I think that that damp Psyduck is the card that is going to be a real boogeyman for this deck. We know that Charizard, Pidgeot, it's always a matchup this deck is always like to see. It's always been able to get over the line against it. However, now I think the Charizard gains the upper hand due to its raw damage output and stopping Dragapult from being able to knock it out using that damp Psyduck. So I think that it is still as strong as it's always been, but I think that the way that it has been played and the way that the meta has sort of morphed around the way that it is currently being played, I don't think this deck is as strong as it used to be, simply from where it belongs in the meta that we're going to be going into. I think that one other point is sort of why I dropped it, is that when you do go into some of these mega decks and some of these bigger HP decks, even using Dusknoir with the Dragapult isn't going to be enough to knock out a mega, meaning that if you do hit into it, if they've got any way to sort of like heal it with Wally's Compassion, move it, pick it up, get rid of it, you've completely lost a turn and given your opponent a prize.
and it just never feels good. So I think the Dragapult is probably going to prove me wrong, just simply from the fact that it's always pretty consistent, has a lot of people playing it. And so, a clock is right twice a day. With the mass amount of people playing it, there's always going to be some that get into those upper echelons of a tournament. But for me, it's just not the deck that it used to be currently. That Psychic Weakness, the amount of Lily's Clefairy being played, Damp Psyduck, Zoroark, there are a lot of hurdles for it to get around at the minute. But that being said, let's look at a list. And as I said, this is I've sort of taken Gengar W's deck because it seemed to be the best representation of all of the decks being played on Limitless at the minute, to where they all sort of have different counts, but they seem to be very much in the middle. That hybrid I was talking about, playing some Rare Candy, still playing 2 Budu, just sort of slow burn through the deck, still playing that Hilda to, grab that Neo upper energy. The energy count getting a little bit smaller now, that Luminous, the basic, the 1 Psychic. So it sort of starts to become a bit of a hybrid of the 2 decks, slow pult and fast pult, in order to make this middle pult, this medium pult, the walking pult, the jogging pult, whatever you might want to call it. And I think that there's not too much to be said. The Lily's Determination, as mentioned, really does help this deck out. The Latias EX continuing to make sure you can get into Budu in the early game. The Turo, always a good option for Sob, but this deck's still inherently weak to that, based on the fact that, you only play 1 Turo. If it has to go anywhere early game, it has to be Ultra Ball, anything like that, your opponent's definitely going to take advantage of that. So yeah, this is Dragapult. It's looked pretty much the same as it always does. It's just sort of that hybrid at the minute. But what we could find is there is actually one way to play it better than the other. Is the 4 Rare Candy and the faster build better to go for? Or is Slowpoke back in the picture? Or is Dragapult and Dracula just going to be sort of a side setter to something like a Pulsar in the future? I don't think so. I think this is definitely still the best way to play it, but who knows? But that being said, let's get into our number 3 archetype, and this is one that really pains me to say, but I really do think this deck is in a better position than it has been for a long time. And that deck is Charizard Pidgeot EX. Now, a little bit about me for those who don't know me. The last couple of years have been a difficult time in the Pokemon TCG for me. Charizard is probably my least favourite Pokemon. Not just because of the TCG. When I was very young, me and my brother got Fire Red and Leaf Green for Christmas. He went and picked Charmander first. I thought, because I was really young, I actually thought, because I had Leaf Green, I had to pick Bulbasaur. So I picked Bulbasaur, and he obviously just used to shit all over me every time we battled. And of course, that made me really hate Charizard, because I love Venusaur, and it made me actually restart my save and get Squirtle just so I could use my Blastoise on his Charizard later on in life, once I figured out how to actually play the game properly, should I say. But yeah, Charizard always been a card and a Pokemon that I really dislike, and that being very good sort of a couple of years ago and coming back into prevalence now, a big deal. But also, again, from when I was a kid, Gardevoir is also a Pokemon I really can't stand, and it's been so good for so long. Nothing to do with the card again. It's just like from when I was a kid, I always used to hate Wally in the games because I was quite outgoing. I was very sort of extroverted and stuff, and Wally used to annoy me because he was a bit like shy and stuff in the game. I was just like, get a life. So yeah, it's quite funny to think that like for the last while, those two have sort of been in the format and very high at the top of it. And I've just sort of had to sit there and deal with the fact that 2 of my least favourite Pokemon are running all over me all the time. But anyway, let's get into this. I think Charizard Pidgeot had a really good showcase at Worlds with Oyvind doing excellently well with it. And I think that it continues to do well. I think from the regionals we've just seen, it's not really hit those same heights that it did at Worlds, but I think its time is about to come. The reason it didn't sort of hit those same heights is the popularity of Dragapult still being really high. Pult Noir being a really bad matchup for this deck. So the mass popularity of that deck definitely getting in the way of this performing at its very best level. But we have mentioned it 100 times now, that Damp Psyduck, a really key card for this deck, stopping those Dust Noirs from knocking themselves out and putting the extra damage on that Charizard or on that Pidgeot, allowing the Dragapult to take key knockouts when it needs to, while sprinkling onto the bench. So I really think that getting rid of that bad matchup, and I don't know if it will completely fix it. I'm sure Dragapult will have a lot to say about that debate in the coming weeks, and we'll probably play higher boss counts and higher capture counts just to make sure that Psyduck goes to bed quicker rather than later. But I do think that even if it disrupts for a turn, it just means that Charizard's able to get that extra attack off, Pidgeot's able to search that one more time, and of course that always puts you in a better position. And Lily's determination as well, these evolving stage 2 decks, always going to thrive off Lilies. We've been focused on Arven and TM Evo for so long, but Lily's giving you another avenue to take on the first turn if that's not going to line up. So it's something really good for this deck. The use of Max Belt, I actually think becomes really prevalent in the next couple of sets, just because Charizard could always hit the numbers of those stage 2s, but not a lot of decks outside of the one hit decks can take knockouts on stage 2 megas, stage 1 megas even. But playing the Max Belt actually allows Charizard to do that in the mid, like from as early as the mid game, and then definitely in the late game. So I think that the Max Belt becomes for sure the best A-spec to play in Charizard. Obviously being able to get through those basic EX early game, the higher HP stuff in the mid game and late game, obviously you're running over everything by that point. So definitely a key point. I think that Chi-Yu remains as a really good one prize attacker, making that Goldengo matchup almost a secure and tied up bow. I haven't seen Zard lose to Goldengo many times. The narrative may change a little bit with sort of the Solrock Lunatone versions of Goldengo, but I do think Chi-Yu a very powerful card. And I think that Rocket's Watchtower definitely saw its showcase in Liam Halliburton's deck, being in the Zoroark, but I don't actually think the card is all that popular, so Pidgeot's still able to give it the inherent consistency it has, while not being under threat of Dragapult as well. And so I think Charizard moves into a really favourable position. Good Goldengo matchup, good Gardevoir matchup, able to run through things like Zoroark when it gets to that sort of mid-game and Zoroark's taking a couple of prizes with that Max Belt. It means you're able to one-shot them, they're not able to one-shot you, so on and so forth. So I do think it's got some very good matchups into a lot of the decks at the top of the meta, and unfortunately for me, that means Charizard will be around for a while longer. And I can tell you for a fact just how strong I think this deck is right now. It's that I'm actually considering taking it to Lille, which will pay me a great deal, but unfortunately, if the deck's good, you've got to play it no matter what picture is on it. So Charizard, Pidgeot, definitely one to think about. So let's look at a list. This is from Alex Hamilton, and this to me is as ideal as I think the deck gets. I really like the new inclusion of Klefki. The Tatsugiri been in for a while now, being able to sort of handpick those supporters out of the deck in the early game. But if not, using that Klefki, shutting down things like Teal Mask Ogerpon, shutting down things like Run Errand, and you know, some of these new basic abilities we've been talking about. Fantastic card. I think it's going to really help Charizard get itself into a lot of these games that maybe it would fall behind in otherwise. We're very focused on TM Evo here. We've got 2 Arven, 4 Leaders Determination, trying to draw into those as much as we can. That Town Store, making sure we see the TM Evo turn 1. We sort of mentioned with Cerulege, Jet Energy, getting you out of those sub locks, but as well as that, that Mist Energy, stopping anything silly from happening, anyone sort of putting status conditions on you, anyone trying to paralyze you, poison you, burn you, all of the above. That Mist Energy, really crucial for that reason. And of course, a thin Dust Noir line. You could get rid of this if you really wanted to. It's obviously not a must in the deck, but it has proved itself really strong. previously, allowing Charizard to do something it can't do all that often, which is take multi-prize turns. That Briar, the only time it can usually do that throughout the game, but the Dusknoir may be able to take out an engine Pokemon while Zard rips through the active, so on and so forth. But as I said, this deck really strong position right now. I think it's got a lot going for it in both matchups and overall consistency. I think the problem that you might have is just, playing 3 stage 2s. It can be a little bit inconsistent, so is there a way to make this more efficient, more consistent, and making sure you sort of get into the game every single time you set up for a round? But yeah, great deck overall. Really happy it's sort of back in the format, because it does keep Guardy in check just that little bit with this and Zoroark, sort of pinning it back, because I think if not, Guardy would run away with everything. I mean, not that it already is, because it pretty much wins everything that comes out, but yeah, definitely having this deck back around in the format gives Guardy something to think about. Now, you haven't seen Guardy yet, and I'll give you a clue. You are not going to see it at number 2 either. Instead, you have none other than the moneymaker Goldengo EX. Now, this deck really sitting at the top of the meta in pretty much every format we've had since Black Bolt White Flare. Gaining that Genesect gave it an immense amount of consistency, allowing it to pretty much get in the game all the time. But Goldengo cashes in once again in our Mega Evolution base set and gets Lunatone and Solrock, and it gives it some new dynamics. Not only are you able to sort of draw through your deck with those coin bonuses and the Lunar Cycle, it gives it a very different dynamic, similar to Cerulege, where you can keep your one prize board state very easily in the early game, getting down your Gimme Ghouls, using your Solrocks, chasing down some of those Pokemon, and taking prizes without having to use your Goldengo. Now, there's a couple of reasons that's important. Goldengo needs energy to be able to do damage. Now, the earlier you're doing that in the game, the more times you're going to have to do it, which means the more times you're going to have to Vessel, the more times you're going to have to Superior Energy Retrieval, just to keep your resources on board. However, Solrock counteracts all that. You're able to take knockouts and prizes, pushing yourself forward in the game while not expending any of those resources. So it means no matter what ends up in front of you, whether it be a high HP Stage 2, a high HP Mega Evolution, whatever it might be, you're going to have all the resources you need still left in deck or hand from how many cards you draw to make sure that you can get over those every time. And it also means that something like a Toedscruel is far less effective against you, because your energy isn't all going to be in the bin when you go to take a big attack. It's obviously all still going to be in deck, so hopefully you won't need to get as much back out, because you've already done the damage with Solrock, chipped away at things, taken early knockouts, so you've got far more time to get all the energy back in hand, even with a Toedscruel in play, and take a knockout. I think that the thing I like the most about Goldengo now compared to previous formats is that being able to threaten a big knockout at any point, unlike maybe like a Raging Bolt, because you can just sit there with a one prize board. As soon as your opponent puts something in play that looks tasty and you want to take, you just put up the Goldengo, you use Lunar Cycle. If you're playing the non-Lunatone Solrock version, you just Energy Surge Pro, and you can go straight through that. There's no sort of fringes on the edges of sort of getting the energy to take a knockout. All you need is like a couple of cards, and you're able to get through most things in the format, sometimes even giving you 3 prizes. It sounds pretty good to me. Goldengo, as we know, some pretty good matchups all around the board. The matchups that aren't so great, you might still even be able to run away with just from the raw damage output that you have. I do think that with the rise of Charizard, Pidgeot in popularity, maybe even in strength in this meta, as I've predicted, you might have a tougher time on the top table sort of dodging and weaving some of those matchups. But I think for the most part, you've got good matchups everywhere else. If not good, then 50-50, and if you're good at the deck and playing it and know your lines, you'll definitely not have a bad time. But I think that before we sort of go into the deck list, there's some funny sort of tech cards that I think Goldengo's starting to play. So if we jump straight in, you can see the Cornerstone Ogerpon straight away in this deck. So people knowing that this is going to continue to see play, And obviously, if we're already playing the fighting energy, we can use the Cornerstone Ogerpon to really help us in the mirror, because lots of Goldengos don't play an out or even an effective attacker, should I say, into the Cornerstone Ogerpon. Sometimes you just put in the active and your opponent can't do anything and you win. The great thing with this, however, is that if our opponent has a Cornerstone Ogerpon, we have one as well, so therefore we can hit each other all night long. so that sort of creates a funny dynamic that sort of Goldengo beats Goldengo with Cornerstone as long as Goldengo doesn't also play Cornerstone. So it sort of creates a really funny 4D chess game there. But I really like sort of the new Precious Trolley. Definitely not needing Energy Search Pro here because you only play the 2 types of energy. So making sure you get out all of your Gimme Ghouls, your Soul Rocks, your Lunatones, and your Genesect turn 1 is really, really helpful. The Iron Bundle we've already discussed is really, really good for that Soul Rock to chase down correct knockouts earlier in the game. Doing Cosmic Beam into anything is always going to feel alright, because at least we're doing something that turn. But obviously, Cosmic Beaming something with 70 HP and knocking it out is always going to be our preferred angle. So yeah, I think that Goldengo, plenty of room to play tech cards, as you can see with the Ogerpon. And yeah, Carrion Non, great idea. I think that we're going to be seeing a lot of that. I do think it is the best tech that you can probably play to beat your fellow Goldengos. And I would just say make sure you are competent in the mirror, because there are going to still be a humongous influx of them. This deck's still the most popular deck on Limitless, even months after White Bolt, Black Bolt, White Flare. So yeah, definitely prepare for that. And yeah. Oh, one final thing I should mention: the Vitality Band, from testing that we've done, my testing group, in there for the Frillish, making sure you can hit 80 damage to be able to get through Frillish and you don't get item locked. So that Vitality Band becoming really, really important in some of those Gardevoir Jellicent matchups, just to make sure Cosmic Beam is doing that little bit extra just to get over the line. As we know, doesn't take resistance into account, so you don't really have many other problems elsewhere, just against that Frillish and 80 HP basic. So Solrock needing that little headband to put around its shining spikes on the outside of it. So yeah, that is a really cool include as well. So we all know by now what my number 1 pick is for this format. It really does pay me to say it, but Gardevoir once again, right at the top of things. I don't see how anyone can think otherwise. The deck is even better than it perhaps was a couple of weeks ago. So without further ado, let's get into our final pick, Gardevoir EX. So why does this deck get better? Well, it keeps its same good matchups. It keeps good matchups into Raging Bolt. It keeps good matchups into Dragapult. It obviously has a lot of different avenues you can go down against some of those more fringe decks that give it a good time. But on top of that, the deck gains from this set. Lily's Determination, absolutely fantastic. I think that you still probably want to play some research, maybe a split, maybe you don't play Lilies, maybe you just play research, because you do want to discard your energy. So I do think that, Professor's Research does have a lot of synergy with the deck, but Lily's definitely an addition you can use. It gains Mysterious Garden. Discard a Psychic Energy from hand and draw up to the number of Psychic Pokemon you have in play. Not all Gardevoir versions will play this, not all Gardevoir archetypes, but Mysterious Garden definitely something the deck gains. On top of that, Mega Gardevoir is something we gain. A very, very, very violent attacker. I feel like Mega Gardevoir in the Dragapult matchup literally makes it unwinnable for Dragapult. Not able to get through it with a Dusknoir and a Dragapult, not able to get through it with a Hawlucha, a Dusknoir, and a Dragapult. Mega Gardevoir just pretty much being able to mop up 4 prizes for the 3 into that matchup every single time. So yeah, really, really rough card for Dragapult to see. But again, I don't think every list is going to play it. It's just another great option. However, one thing I do know that all of these decks are going to play is the new Ralts and Curlier. Gardevoir did not need an upgrade in these 2 positions. However, both of them head and shoulders better than the previous versions we have. With Ralts, Same HP, however currently the Ralts that we have in format isn't really doing a lot. Earlier in the game you're sort of just sitting there. If you're using it to TM Evo, you're doing that. Other than that, it's just being left on the board. However, this new Ralts has collect, it can draw itself a card, and of course if that Ralts then gets knocked out, who cares, because the Rocks goes in the discard with an energy which you're going to be able to reattach anyway with Gardevoir EX later on in the game. So it also almost becomes a really, really efficient way to get yourself into the game, seeing that extra card and getting an energy in the bin. And then that Curlier becomes 100 HP Curlier with that call sign grabbing you. It's pretty much Colourful Friends Eevee, just allowing you to grab all the things you need for the following turn, whether that be Gardevoir EXs, whether that be Pheasantipity EX, whether that be another Ralts. You can just grab 3 Pokemon from your deck, put them in your hand, and that makes this Curlier absolutely phenomenal. Even if this Curlier goes down, you can just rare candy into a Gardevoir the following turn with the Ralts on your bench. You can drop a Pheasantipity and draw 3 cards, and yeah, there becomes a million and one options. And you know, we all know that Gardevoir didn't need any help to continue to be good, but unfortunately it has. I think that one really, really, really scary thing about Gardevoir now, more than ever, just because the Mega Evolution's been included now, the Mysterious Card and all these things, is that when you come up against a Gardevoir, you're almost playing a matchup within a matchup, because you're trying to figure out what they do play and what they don't play. They could play Drifloon, they could play 2 Bravery Charm, they could play 4 Monkey Dory, they could play 3, they could play a Mega Gardevoir, they could not. And I just think that you can't play around all of these things in the first game, and I think that Gardevoir almost gets this extra enhancement going into the match in the first of the best of 3, because you aren't 100% sure what they're going to be playing in their deck, and you almost need to be cautious of everything or cautious of nothing and fall into the trap. And so I think that is a really, really big benefit to have. There's not a lot of ways to sort of get a leg up on your opponent before the match starts. Obviously, you know, throughout the game you can make better decisions, sequence better, you can get a little bit lucky and hit the things, but I think Gardevoir EX is one of the only decks that actually has a little bit of an edge before the matchup even starts, because your opponent's not really going to be sure what's going to go on and what you have access to. And even in some matchups, you're not going to see everything they have access to. You know, Gardevoir can be really good at hiding what it has and it doesn't have. So I do think that this deck becomes even stronger in that sense. As I've already mentioned, you can reintroduce that Drifloon if you want to, just to get a bit more of those one-hit knockouts. You know, into some of these mega Pokemon that aren't necessarily in tanky decks or the basic ones. You can use that Drifloon and go straight through them and get a 1-for-3 trade, which seems absolutely nasty. I would not want to be on the receiving end of that. I think that Monkey Dory continues to be probably the best card in the format. Allows so many decks to commit to multi-prize turns, but none better than Gardevoir. Monkey Dory continuing to be an absolute menace. And of course, I think the Jellicent deck is still going to be the front runner. We mentioned what it can do to Dragapult, but I just think that the Oceanic Gloom straight into the Jellicent can be really, really ambiguous and quite annoying to deal with. It can stop you from getting set up, and the longer you give Gardevoir to get energy in the bin and everything else, it becomes almost impossible to beat it. I do think that the Monkey Dory and the Jellicent still allow for de-evolution plays to happen. Playing 1 de-evolution will probably feel really good. Lots of these megas coming into the format are stage 2 ones, some of the more playable ones, so being able to do that as well feels very good. But overall, Gardevoir still at the top of the meta for me. Personally speaking, I think the Jellicent EX version is better, but I've got 2 deck lists here for you, just so we can have a look at both, see which one looks a little bit better, and for you, should I say, and yeah, we've sort of got a Mega Guardy and a Jellicent one. So first up, we're going to look at this Jellicent one. It's pretty bog standard by this point what they look like. As you can see, yes, the new Curlier, the new Ralts. Definitely not something that Gardevoir needed, but here we go. For Lily's Determination, leaning right into that card, and the power of that card in this deck is insane. Just knowing for a fact that you don't play any of those Buddy Poffins, you do play the Artazon, you do play the Nest Ball. What's the best way to see those turn 1? Well, with your secret box.
and with seeing more cards, and that is exactly what Lily's Determination does. So excellent card. As I said, the Devolution, the Air Balloon, the Bravery Charm, everything in here able to do several different avenues, and the Oceanic Gloom into the Jellicent, always strong, always good, and I definitely think the better way to play the deck at the minute. However, I should go back and say this is from Raj Shamir. I think, I swear this deck went like 11 wins, no losses, no draws in a tournament. I could be making that up, but definitely one you should be looking at. But then, of course, we've got K Sombrina as well, sort of leaning more into a Mega Gardevoir archetype. As you can see, a lot of the frills cut out, a lot more straightforward, playing that Mystery Garden as we're going to be loading up our bench with Psychic type Pokemon. Still playing that Secret Box, but as I mentioned previously, Research being preferred here to Lily's Determination. Still nice to see those cards earlier in the game, but the Research, getting those energy in the bin, getting them ready to be charged up for Mega Gardevoir to do some immense amounts of damage. Really, really strong attacker in its own right, but you know, maybe not 100% play just because it gives up those prizes. Zoroark can just about get there with like a Monkey Dory ping or something like that to take a one-hit knockout here. So, you know, you are susceptible to some things in the format, but definitely a good attacker in its own right. But apart from that, we know how good Screentail can be. We know how strong Lily's Clefairy can be. So another really good 60 cards here. So thank you very, very much for coming in and tuning into my first YouTube video. I've got a huge smile on my face. I'm just so happy to sort of get this started, get the content rolling out, and I'm so glad you all came to watch. Please let me know if I can do anything better. Please let me know what you think the top 10 decks are. If you disagree with anything I said, I would love to get more discussion going and get a community started here at the Top Cut Academy. I'd just like to give a shout out to everyone and my locals, my wife, my family members, for sort of really pushing me to finally start in this endeavour and start pushing towards opening a Pokemon school, the Top Cut Academy, for plenty of people to come and learn at. And yeah, I'm just so excited to get this going. I wish everyone the best of luck at Belo, at Milwaukee, at Lille. If you see me at Lille, please come say hello. I love to meet new people, and I would love to talk to you about how your day is going and what deck you brought and why you decided to bring it, so on and so forth. I will definitely end up switching decks the night before. I'm joking, hopefully not. I've got a good month to prepare for it, so I will try my best to lock it in on something. But yeah, I'm just so happy to be here. Thank you again for watching the video. Peace out, much love from Professor Benji to you. Welcome to the Top Cut Academy. It'll be a pleasure to bring you more in the future. Good night.